How much house can you afford to purchase? That's a big question. It's a quintessential financial planning question. I'm going to help you answer it using 3 criteria. I got that and more coming up. My name is Mike Bernard. I am the host of the Wise Money Show. I'm also one of the certified financial planners right here at Korhorn Financial Group. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and smash that thumbs up button. So one of the quintessential financial planning questions is, how much house can I afford? So often we look at just one area of our financial life and try to answer a question that's going to impact all 6 areas of our financial life. Normally, here's what the process is. You might, look at your budget or really what you're paying right now for rent or your mortgage, but ultimately it's going to lead you to talking to a lender. And these days, sometimes you don't even need to talk to them. Sometimes you just log in and you enter some information online and they tell you, here's how much house you can afford. I was talking to a friend recently who's got, they're both young professionals. They got a young family. They don't have a lot of debt. And they were thinking of buying a house in the $300,000 range. And they logged online to, I think it was Bankrate. I can't remember which site it was. They plugged in their info and they were approved. They were told you should buy a house for $1.3 million. That is not a lie. I'm not joking. So listen, even though you're going to go to the bank in the house buying process, you're going to go to the bank, you're going to get pre-approved, they're going to do their credit check, their credit analysis, and their debt to income and all of those ratios, and they're going to tell you, this is how much we'll loan you, this is your pre-approved amount, and therefore you can afford this much house. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. In fact, with interest rates so low and housing prices skyrocketing, you might be tempted, you might feel the need to borrow more or buy a more expensive house than you really otherwise would have. And that can actually get people into a lot of trouble. And before I tell you the 3 criteria that you will use to determine how much house you can afford, let me set the stage again and tell you why this is so critical. So much of your housing expenses today will impact today's budget. And so, number 1, typically the largest expense that people have during their working years is their mortgage. I mean, there's some times where it's a higher amount, or there's something else, but I mean, really, for the average person, your biggest expense every single month is going to be your mortgage. And then think about all of the other expenses that are connected to your house that exist in your monthly budget. I mean, the direct ones are your homeowner's insurance and your property taxes. The more expensive the house is, the more your property taxes are, the more your homeowner's insurance is. Typically, the more expensive the house is, the higher your utility costs are. Because typically, the bigger houses, they cost more, and they cost more to cool when it's hot out and heat when it's cold out, right? The more expensive your maintenance is, right? That little fixer-upper here, or that new furniture there, or we've got to paint this room. The bigger the house, the more expensive the house is, the more expensive all of that maintenance is as well. And even sometimes school costs and there's lots of things that are connected to the house that you purchase that are going to impact your cash flow and your budget today. Now, what about retirement? In retirement, what's going to be your biggest expense? You're thinking health insurance. And I would have thought that too until I saw the facts. The truth is, your biggest expense in retirement is also going to be your house. It's going to be insuring, paying the property taxes, maintaining your house, doing housing improvements, that sort of stuff. Believe it or not, all the data shows, health insurance is extremely high and healthcare is extremely high, but it's your housing expense. That's going to be your number 1 expense in retirement. So your number 1 expense during your working years and in retirement is your house. And when you decide to buy a more expensive house or a less expensive house, it's going to have a ripple impact on your cash flow today and your cash flow and financial life in retirement. And so the right housing decision can bring peace to your overall financial life And it can also make things lopsided. And you've heard phrases like being house poor, which is almost the opposite. It's house rich, but you're rich with house, but you've got nothing else. You can't do anything. All right, so enough of the banter. How do you figure out how much house you can afford? I would tell you it's not just how much you can borrow, because that would mean at 65, when you're about ready to retire, you can borrow as much as possible, right? Because you probably have a ton of equity. And so that can't be the only measure. So what is it? And it's sort of like the Goldilocks approach. It can't be too much. Too little of a house or too less expensive. And you might say, well, I want certain features or amenities. And so it's got to be just right. How do you find just right? It's really the blend of 3 different criteria. Number 1, the right amount of house to buy, the house that you can afford, is ideally one that you can put 20% down, where you'll have 20% equity right from the get-go. And why is that important? You might know that's the magic number. That's the magic amount of equity you need to have to avoid private mortgage insurance, or PMI. So they do that. That PMI is a separate expense the bank charges you, your lender charges you, for the added risk that maybe your house value won't stay at the level it's at now, and it will decline. And if they need to foreclose on the house, the bank's going to want to make sure that they've got enough equity so they don't lose money. So they charge you extra if you don't have at least 20% equity. And sometimes, typically this is it's an additional monthly cost, $100, $150, something like that. Sometimes they just increase your closing costs, but it's an extra expense that gets you nothing. And I'm really not for throwing money away, and the folks that I know that are wealth builders really aren't big on wasting money. And so I want you to at least put 20% down. It will make your interest rate cheap and your cost to carry the mortgage as low as possible. But the other thing it does is it gives you that bandwidth. I mean, the reason why the bank charges a little bit extra if you don't have that is because it's a little riskier. And you're going to want that safety net as well, because you might be moving, and when you move, it's going to cost you something to sell your house, and usually that eats up some of the equity, and therefore you've got less money to buy the next house. And so making sure you've got a healthy amount of equity gives you some guardrails against changes, maybe violent changes in the housing market, but also gives you a little bit of cushion for when you sell. You can still have a decent amount for a down payment on the next place. So the right place, you can put at least 20% down. So that's the first metric that I would tell you on how much house can you afford. Can you afford to put at least 20% down? That's the first one. Second one, your monthly payment is less than or equal to 25% of your take-home income. Now, this is a rule of thumb. It would ebb and flow, because if your income is commission and it's all variable, or your income is tips or something that's totally variable, then that might not be the right measure. But if you've got a consistent, reliable monthly income, then I would tell you your housing expense shouldn't exceed 25% of your take-home. Otherwise, if it gets more than that, then you're going to say, yeah, geez, one paycheck every single month is going towards the house, just the mortgage. The other paycheck has to go towards all the bills. I can't do anything. Yeah, that sounds a lot like house poor, right? And so you're going to, because the other things in life you're still going to say yes to. And if you don't have the cash to say yes to those things, then you're using debt, and your whole financial life is lopsided, like I said. So your monthly mortgage costs should be 25% or less of your take home. And ideally, you're working on a 15-year mortgage as well. And so that gets harder and harder to do, but that helps your certified financial planner and you determine how much house you can afford. So can you put at least 20% down? More, obviously, the better. Can your monthly payment fit within 25% of your take-home, your reliable, consistent take-home income, or even less? That'd be great. So those are the first 2 measures. The third measure to help you figure out how much house you can afford is, can you put that down payment down? Can your mortgage be less than 25% of your take-home? And can you still fund all of your other major financial goals? This is one that we see a lot of people get wrong in their overall finances. Well, I can swing that mortgage payment, but I can't save the right amount for retirement. I can swing that mortgage payment, but we can't really afford the vacation that we want to do every single year, and so we borrow or whatever. I can afford that mortgage, or we can afford to live in that neighborhood, but I won't be able to help my kids with college. Whatever. And I'm just throwing those common financial goals out there, but whatever your financial goals are, if you're living in a house that costs a certain amount where you've got to unwillingly sacrifice on some of those other big goals, then I would tell you you might be in too much house. If you willingly sacrifice on those goals, fine. I mean, for sure, if you say, in order to live in this house, I'm gonna work until 67 or 70, great. Now, you've got to balance that with the health risk or the chance that you'd get let go before then or whatever else. So you've got to play that game. If you look and say, well, to live in this house, we're not going to help the kids as much with college, and we're okay with that, fine. That again, I don't make any value judgments, and your certified financial planner shouldn't either. They should be for you and for your goals, and that's the key. If you should be for all of these financial goals, but one of them makes the others impossible, I would say that you probably aren't allocating your resources appropriately. You probably have too much house there. So that's the three ways. Those are the three ways that you can determine how much house is the right amount for you. Right now, we've got an enormous housing boom happening. And I think a lot of people are looking and saying, well, prices are high for the type of house that I want, and interest rates are low. Therefore, I need to, or I will, buy more house than what I originally thought. And that might work, but make sure you still can put 20% down. Make sure that mortgage payment is still 25% or less of your reliable take-home income, and make sure it doesn't create an undue sacrifice to those other really big financial priorities. If you know someone that has gotten in trouble with real estate, they've overextended themselves, they've become house poor, or maybe you remember from 12, 13 years ago when someone lost a house, foreclosed because for whatever reason during the real estate crisis. It's likely because they violated one or more of those three criteria, those three principles. Don't violate them yourself. Apply those three principles, work with your certified financial planner, figure out, make the realistic assessment and say, hey, here's how much house I can afford, here's my guardrail. I want to have something more than this because that's the amenities that I want, but I can't go above this amount. So I hope that helps you. Work with your certified financial planner, do that calculation, narrow in on that number, and when it's time for you to make the housing adjustment, you'll have the full confidence and wisdom to go ahead and do so. If you don't have a CFP on your team, you can contact one on my team. Find us online, corehorn.com, that's Corehorn with a K, wisemoneyshow.com. You can find us there as well, or just send us an email, info@corehorn.com. All right, there you have it. Go out and take your next wise step in your financial life.